Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. So here's something to think about. What does it really mean for a world-class academic place, one focused on the very foundations of Europe, to be relevant today? With politics shifting so fast, can an ivory tower genuinely shape policy, maybe bridge some of these deep ideological divides? Or is it, kind of doomed to just discuss things like, the wool trade in 15th century Flanders? We're talking today about the European University Institute, the EUI. It's up in the hills near Florence. It was set up back in 1976 with this big mission, fostering the advancement of learning in fields which are of particular interest for the development of Europe.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, it has this kind of mystique, doesn't it? Almost like a Hogwarts for European scholars, exploring Europe's history, its ideas.
Right, and that Hogwarts image sort of feeds into this challenge the EUI has faced for a while. It's something the Economist article we're looking at really highlights this relevance problem. It's like a split personality almost, trying to balance really top-level academic work with, actual policy impact. And look, this isn't exactly new. It's why they set up the Robert Schuman Center way back in 1993, and then more recently, the School of Transnational Governance, the STG, in 2017. Both were really specific attempts to, bridge that gap, to train policy leaders, make sure all that deep scholarship actually influences the practical side of government.
Okay, so enter Patricia Nance. Her background sounds quite interesting. Academic, yes, but also experience in the private sector, advising government.
Mm-hmm.
She became president in March 2024. And the Economist piece frames her arrival as she's determined to fix these problems, to really make the EUI relevant.
That's the narrative, yes. And The Economist does a decent job pointing out the main challenges and this new direction under President Nance. But, when I looked at the other material alongside the article, what really struck me was, the picture gets a lot more nuanced. It almost makes you question some of the article's initial assumptions, actually. It gives you a deeper sense of the EUI's current impact and its potential.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's unpack that. The Economist uses that Hogwarts analogy, suggesting the EUI produces too few practicing wizards.
Mm-hmm.
They even have that anecdote, don't they, about academics studying medieval textiles. I think it was silk consumption in late medieval Catalonia. And they quote Mark Leonard from ECFR, sort of wondering if the EUI is really relating to the practical business of government. It paints a vivid picture, sure, an ivory tower. But is it fair? Is that the whole story now?
Yeah. It's definitely evocative, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But it feels maybe a little outdated. When you look at what the EUI has actually been doing, this idea of it just being an ivory tower, great for a headline, maybe, but it misses quite a bit. I mean, the EUI already has a pretty significant focus on policy training, on direct engagement with practitioners. It's established. We're talking things like their Policy Leadership Fellows program, PLF Fellows, lots of executive education courses, joint events they specifically run with services from the European Parliament. They even have dedicated hubs working on urgent stuff like migration policy or tech policy. These aren't just, window dressing. They're set up specifically to push the research into the decision-making loop. So I think the real question isn't if these things exist, because they clearly do. It's more about, how effectively is their impact being measured and maybe communicated.
That's a really good distinction, impact versus just activity. And speaking of impact, the Economist article really plays up Patricia Nance coming in with a stiff new broom, making big changes. It specifically claims she scrapped their big annual event, the State of the Union Conference, SOU, calling it a costly networking fest. Sounds pretty radical, doesn't it? Scrapping the flagship event. Her new mission, the article says, is academic excellence, providing orientation, guidance to European institutions and society, and importantly, communicating better. And it flags this shift, cooperating more with national governments, member states, not just Brussels. They mention a project with Poland on security and defense as an example.
Yeah, see, this is where the story in the article might be jumping the gun a little bit. Nance definitely has this strong new mission about engaging outwards more. But the evidence suggests the State of the Union Conference, the SOU, it hasn't actually been scrapped. I mean, look, they held SOU 2024. It happened. And their own academic calendar clearly lists SOU 2025 for next May 8th and 9th in Florence. So, okay, maybe there's an overhaul happening. That seems likely. Perhaps fewer big VIP keynotes, more focused working sessions, something like that. But that's a reform, a significant one maybe, but it's definitely not a cancellation. And I think that nuance matters, right? It changes the picture of Nance's stiff new broom from demolition to more of a strategic rethink about making these events genuinely impactful.
Okay, renovation, not demolition. That sounds more plausible for an established institution. All right, let's shift then to what feels like the real core of Nance's mission, this idea of rethinking Europe's intellectual foundations. She wants to get beyond, as The Economist puts it, those tedious debates over how much power the EU's federal government should get, and instead asks this bigger question: what is Europe?
Mm-hmm.
The article gives that really politically charged example, doesn't it? Giorgia Meloni's speech, where she apparently used these cherry-picked lines from the Ventotene Manifesto about a socialist European revolution abolishing private property, and then Meloni declared, "Not my Europe." What's the backstory there? What do we need to understand?
That anecdote is actually quite spot on, I think, for showing just how politically loaded these founding texts can become, how selectively people read them. Because, yes, the Ventotene Manifesto does contain those lines about the revolution being socialist, about private property being abolished, limited, corrected, or extended case by case. They are in there. But just like you said, they're often plucked out of context. The broader text, the manifesto as a whole, really emphasizes pragmatic, non-dogmatic reform. It's pushing a vision for federalism, mainly to stop nationalistic wars. That crucial context just gets lost in the political sound bites. And this links back to the article's implication that maybe populists won't show up at EUI events. But the background material suggests, well, actually, they probably will. Political actors tend to engage when the discussion is about real power, tangible issues. Things like defense industrial capacity, digital sovereignty, securing supply chains. The EUI is already hosting talks on exactly these things, and they are attracting a wide range of people.
So it's less about everyone agreeing ideologically and more about finding that practical common ground, which is where Nan's strategy gets really interesting, I think. She's urging EU supporters to embrace a word often used by nationalists: sovereignty. But specifically, joint sovereignty, identifying where European countries need to act together, like on digital tech, AI, just to compete globally with, say, America or China.
Yes, and that feels like absolutely the right conversation for Europe to be having right now. It's
Right.
very pragmatic. If you connect this to the bigger picture, Europe is already kind of moving, often because it has to, towards sort of joint sovereignty industrial strategy. In critical areas, right? Digital, AI, economic security, defense industry. Think about how they've relaxed state aid rules for green tech and strategic manufacturing. An EUI that can bring together the national capitals, the actual member state governments, not just the Brussels bubble, is incredibly well positioned to help shape this thinking. It's about pulling strengths to regain some collective clout on the world stage.
That's a fascinating angle. So if joint sovereignty is the goal, how does an institution like the EUI actually help Europe build it, practically speaking? Especially now, with this renewed focus on industrial policy and those relaxed EU state aid rules for clean tech and energy running until 2030, what's the EUI's role?
Well, this coordinated approach, this is exactly the EUI's potential sweet spot, I think. It can help define where sovereignty should be pooled. Which specific areas? Is it chips, AI, compute power, joint defense procurement? And just as importantly, how should it be pooled? What are the design choices? The governance structures needed? How do you ensure accountability? So the deeper question becomes not just the philosophical, what is Europe? But maybe what are the operating models? The actual practical frameworks that let Europe compete globally, but without, sacrificing its core values, rule of law, social compacts. That's granular work. It's comparative. It cuts across disciplines. It's exactly the kind of real-world problem the EUI could tackle brilliantly, especially if, as we said, it measures its impact rigorously.
Okay, this is really important for you listening. If President Nance is serious about this pivot, aiming for real relevance, what should we look for? What are the concrete signs, the measurable things that would tell us if this new approach is actually working? How do we get past anecdotes and impressions?
That's the critical question, isn't it? And the background materials do suggest some pretty clear, measurable yardsticks. First, you'd look for demand-side uptake. What does that mean? It means tracking how many policy briefs commissioned by policymakers actually get adopted or formally cited. Cited by who? Well, council working groups, European Parliament committees, maybe national ministries back in the member states. And look for this within a reasonable time frame, say 12 to 18 months. The Schuman Center already does policy roundtables with the parliament, so they could build on that, maybe formalize some KPIs. Second, track the talent pipelines. Are we seeing more graduates or fellows from the STG programs or the executive courses getting placed in key roles? Roles within the Commission's DGs, in ministers' cabinets, in national capitals, in the national ministries themselves, or in regulatory agencies. Where the alumni end up is a strong signal.
Okay, uptake in talent. What else?
Third, look for member state buy-in. This is key for the not just Brussels strategy. Are we seeing more co-funded projects directly with national capitals, with the member state governments themselves? Projects on those really critical issues, coordinating defense industries, managing export controls, regulating digital markets. That's the real litmus test, I think. And finally, maybe look for standards and governance footprints. Are EUI ideas, EUI research showing up in the actual nuts and bolts of policy? Things like the implementation guidance for the new AI Act, or the templates being developed for industrial state aid, or even the design of new defense financing tools. They've done recent work on digital sovereignty. That seems like a good starting point. Look, if President Nance starts measuring success using these kinds of metrics, policy uptake, talent placement, co-production with member states on these critical sovereignty files like AI, compute, defense, then yeah, the EUI could really shift from being seen as Hogwarts to becoming genuinely Europe's operating model lab.
That's such a helpful way to frame it. We've really covered some ground here, haven't we? Exploring how this really important institution, the EUI, is trying to navigate its future, moving from that perceived academic haven towards being a more dynamic player in shaping Europe. The Economist article definitely kicked things off, highlighting that push for relevance. But looking a bit closer, as we've done, reveals a much more complex story, and maybe a more impactful one potentially unfolding.
Absolutely. The challenges are definitely real. That push for relevance is understandable. But I agree, the potential is there. Under this new leadership, the EUI could become this vital laboratory for working out Europe's strategic future. Not by making grand pronouncements necessarily, but by helping craft those concrete, actionable frameworks, defining what shared sovereignty looks like in a world that's getting tougher and more competitive.
So a final thought for you to take away. As Europe tries to figure out its path in this really complex future, where do you think the real power to shape its destiny actually lies? Is it in the big speeches from politicians? Or is it maybe in the meticulous, often unseen work happening in places like the EUI, crafting the actual operating models for Europe's shared sovereignty?